Hi, welcome to the next session of BIBA's Best Practices. Today I wanted to talk to you about a very good way of getting students of all ages to practice the math that you've taught them. Worksheets have a limit. They're limited because, number one, they're usually done alone. Some students finish fast, some students never finish at all. And there's a connotation about worksheets, probably because they're overused by many of us. But here's an alternative where children can practice their math concepts and have fun while doing it. Many of you might remember a card game that we used to play when we were kids called War, where you turned over two cards, and whoever's card was of larger value, they kept the card. And you played until one person had all the cards. Well, we're going to do a version of that. We're not going to call it war. That wouldn't be too politically correct. We're going to call it more or less. And I'm deliberately calling it more or less because you can decide when you're playing it on a particular day with your students whether to play more or whether to play less. That's important because one of the problems students have all the way through college is that they don't learn to read or follow directions. And they very often get things wrong because they didn't read the directions. So I would suggest sometimes you play more and sometimes you play less. But let me give you an example of these cards. They can start all the way in kindergarten. Instead of using a deck of cards, I use index cards. You can get the white ones, or you can get the multicolored index cards, which are fun for the classroom. And I made a sample of the cards that I would use for different grade levels. When you're in kindergarten or even pre-K and you're trying to have children learn to count and make a one-to-one correspondence between an object and a number, you can simply use your dots and put different amounts of dots on cards and have them play the exact same way. You deal out an equal number of cards to two kids, they turn them over, and they have to sit there and decide which card is larger. Or remember, on any given day, which card is smaller. And they can be as easy or as complex as you want them to be. The kids can learn that two cards can have the same amount and look different. And it's just a very fun way for the kids to practice. Here's another one. For them to practice counting and making that one-to-one correspondence between the dots and the numbers. Some teachers might want to put the actual number on the card to reinforce the connection between the number and the physical representation of it. That's totally up to you. So that's for very, very young kids. Then we get to, also it could be in kindergarten, but it could also be in first grade, where we just have numbers, just whole counting numbers, and let them do the same thing so that they learn the concept of order and numbers. Now, the next thing that I'm going to suggest can be done with these cards also. And that would be that the directions could be that a student has to turn over two cards at a time. And if you're talking about the very young kids who are just learning one-to-one correspondence, you can simply say, let's see who has the most all together. And later on, you can explain that all together means adding or sum. So you can start to build vocabulary. With the plain numbers, you can have children practice adding. You can even have them practice subtracting if they turn over two cards at a time. You can even, when it comes time to practice times tables, you can have them whose product is the largest or whose product is the smallest. So these can be used in any way that you want to use them. Now we move on to some place where there are no cards pre-made. And this would be a typical, let's say, second grade class, where you're introducing the concept of money. And there, what I had done was I had imported pictures of coins. I put them on mailing labels, and I made index cards that had different numbers of coins on them. So two kids could turn over the cards, and they have to see whose card is of a larger value or of a smaller value. Remember to always vary that. This is a very fun way to have kids practice learning the value of money. And I will include at the end of this video a link to these pages of coins, which you simply have to print on standard mailing label and then just peel them off and stick them on an index card. Okay? And this one is a very, very nice way to have kids practice something not on a worksheet. Then we get to fractions. Fractions are something that kids need to learn to put in size order. So which is smaller, 2/3 or 1/2? Yes, they needed to learn about common denominators, and they can have a piece of paper on the side to do the work. But in the end, they have to figure out which is bigger, 1/2 or 2/3. Which is bigger, 1/4 or 2/5, and so on. I even have some examples where I'm using mixed numbers and let them figure out those. You can definitely use these cards also to practice adding fractions, who has the largest sum, practice subtracting fractions, who has the largest difference, and practice multiplying fractions or dividing them. I didn't mention dividing when I was talking about the whole numbers, because the caveat is, of course, that it's not going to always come out to be a whole number. But you can teach kids to figure out, for example, if one card was 5 and another was 4, it went in 1 with a little bit more. If somebody else had turned over a 7 and a 3, well, that went in 2 and a little bit more. So they could figure out, without getting an exact answer, who has a larger value after a division example. Then we get to decimals, which are very, very important to order. And you can put decimals of various sizes, excuse me for my upside down cards, various sizes with decimal points, with whole numbers, with smaller numbers, and have children practice putting them in order. Have children practice adding the decimals, have them practice subtracting, multiplying, etc. And again, it's a very good way to practice the skills that you are teaching them. Since you're making these cards, you can adjust them in any way that works for your lesson. It's also a very good way to practice positive and negative numbers. So if I have -8 or -10 or -4, and you have to throw in some positive numbers here, which I'm sure I did. Okay, here's 0. Here's +3. Putting positive and negative numbers in size order is a very, very important skill. You also definitely can practice adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing positive and negative numbers using these cards. They're very simple to make. You can organize any kind of ongoing contests that you want in your classroom using them. And just to summarize, you're asking less or more. You can use them for order, for adding, for subtracting, for multiplying or dividing. And I just think that they're an excellent tool and they add fun to practice. So thank you for listening. And again, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to my station. Thank you. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to my channel. If you want any additional information about BBA's best practices or any other teaching techniques, please don't hesitate to use this contact information. Thank you for watching.